The two alien females lay bent over consoles in the cramped cockpit of their stolen junker, stripped naked and moaning, as the neural shock batons delivered agonizing punishment to their tantalizing azure flesh, light years from home, on a one-way trip to the primitive backwater called Earth. John Cook slouched at the grimy bar, knocking back shots of rotgut whiskey, his grizzled face an unreadable mask. The watering hole catered to dregs of the space lanes, asteroid miners, smugglers, mercenaries. Grunts and curses erupted from a knot of burly miners arguing over a card game. Shoving escalated to thrown punches. Bodies crashed into tables, glass shattered. John's instincts kicked in. Moving with brutal efficiency, he waded into the brawl, fists and feet striking with surgical precision. Bones crunched, men crumpled. In seconds it was over, John the last man standing amidst the groaning bodies. An appreciative murmur came from the onlookers, along with a smattering of applause. But one individual watched with keen interest. Mizar, an exquisitely beautiful Hazari female, slunk over to John's table with feline grace, her obsidian eyes appraising him boldly. "Captain Cook," she purred, sliding into the seat opposite him. "I represent the Galactic Council. We find ourselves in need of your unique skills." John scowled, draining his glass. "Not interested, sweetheart. I'm done being the Council's errand boy." Mizar leaned forward, her silken hair cascading over bare blue shoulders. "You haven't heard our offer. The fate of billions hangs in the balance." She brought up a holo display, the ghostly image of a planet hovering over the table. It was an emerald orb, lush with life. Then a shimmering cloud enveloped it. When the haze cleared, the world was a desiccated ruin. "A rogue Hazari scientist has developed this nanoweapon," Mizar murmured. "He plans to auction it to the highest bidder. The Council needs someone to infiltrate his compound and destroy it, someone resourceful, daring, and completely expendable." John's lips twisted in a mirthless half-smile. "And if I refuse? You'll wipe my mind like you did when I retired." "Nothing so crude, but the Council can make life very unpleasant for a man, even in the fringe." Mizar placed a data chip on the table, then rose sinuously. "The Council will grant any pay, any equipment you desire. I'll be in touch." John watched her slink into the crowd, a scowl etched into his weathered face. The smart move was to walk away, not his problem if the universe went to hell, but the memory of that planet's death haunted him, and beneath the cynicism, an ember of his old idealism still smouldered. Cursing under his breath, he scooped up the chip. Sometimes a man had to follow his gut, even if it led straight into the jaws of hell. John swiped the data chip and stormed out of the seedy dive. A few hours later, he was buckling into the command chair of the sleek Council starship, the Raptor's Claw. Mizar slid into the co-pilot's seat beside him. With a throaty roar of fusion engines, the Raptor's Claw blasted off, rocketing towards the remote moon where Dr. Zorax skulked in his lair. "So who is this Zorax prick anyway?" John grunted as he punched in the coordinates for their destination. Mizar called up a holo of a gaunt Hazari male with crazed eyes. Dr. Zorax was the Hazari Empire's top bioweapons researcher, brilliant but twisted. He got caught running illegal experiments on unwilling test subjects. Hazari High Command wanted to execute him, but soft-hearted fools in the government overruled them, tried to rehabilitate him instead. She spat the word like it was poison. "Let me guess, didn't take and he escaped?" "Got it in one, fled with his most lethal creation yet." John snorted derisively. "That's the Hazari for you, naive idiots. You don't rehabilitate rabid dogs, you put 'em down." Mizar shot him an irritated look. "Because the human way has brought so much peace and stability to the galaxy. Shoot first, ask questions never, right? Better than letting maniacs run loose so they can stab you in the back later," John retorted. Their bickering was interrupted by an urgent beeping from the sensor panel. Mizar checked the readouts and hissed in dismay. "Picking up dozens of incoming hostiles. Looks like Zorax hired himself a small army of mercs, fighters coming in fast." "Course he did," John growled, powering up the ship's weapons. No two-bit mad scientist would hole up without some expendable cannon fodder. The Merc fighters swarmed around the Raptor's claw like a cloud of angry hornets, peppering its shields with blaster fire. John wrenched the ship into a wild corkscrew, G-forces slamming them back into their seats. Mizar clutched her harness, face pale. John just grinned savagely as he juked and jinked, evading the worst of the incoming fire. His fingers flew over the weapon controls, sending precisely targeted blasts scything through the Merc formation. One by one, the fighters exploded into plumes of flame and shrapnel. Mizar shrieked at John to be careful as he flew like a crazed acrobat. He just laughed maniacally, eyes alight with battle lust, clearly in his element. The Mercs never stood a chance. In a few minutes of frenetic, masterful flying and shooting, John single-handedly annihilated their fleet. He brought the Raptor's claw screaming down towards the converted mining facility that was Zorax's hideout. A group of Mercs on the landing pad fired portable missile launchers at the approaching ship. John didn't even bother evading, just plowed the ship nose first into the landing pad, crushing the Mercs into pulp beneath the ship's armored belly. John and Mizar leaped out of the ship, only to find themselves facing a horde of heavily armed Mercs. The air sizzled with plasma bolts and hypersonic projectiles. Mizar threw up her hands, projecting a shimmering energy barrier around herself and John. The incoming fire splashed harmlessly off the shield, but Mizar gritted her teeth with the strain of maintaining it against the onslaught. John unslung the massive rotary blaster cannon from his back, a fearsome weapon that normally required a tripod or vehicle mounting. He braced himself and unleashed a storm of blistering energy pulses, sweeping the cannon back and forth. Each salvo scythed down dozens of Mercs, their smoking corpses piling up in hideous windrows. Step by inexorable step, John advanced through the Merc's fire, Mizar's barrier protecting him as he methodically slaughtered every Merc that dared stand against him. Finally, the last Merc fell with a gurgling scream, and John lowered his cannon, surveying the charnel field he'd created. Mizar slumped against a bulkhead, exhausted, and let her barrier flicker out. She eyed the path of butchery John had cut to the entrance of Zorax's facility. Scores of Merc bodies lay sprawled and smoldering. "Crude, but effective," she allowed, grudgingly. John flashed her a blood-spattered savage grin. "Sweetheart, you ain't seen nothing yet." John blew the reinforced doors off their hinges with a shaped plasma charge, the tortured metal screeching as it buckled inward. He and Mizar stormed into the eerily silent facility, nerves stretched taut, ready for anything. But the cavernous chamber that had bustled with mercenary activity mere minutes ago now stood utterly deserted. "I don't like this," John muttered, blaster cannon swiveling as he scanned for threats. "Where the hell did they all go?" "Forget them," Mizar replied tersely, tapping at her handheld scanner. "We need to find that nano-weapon before Zorax can use it." They advanced cautiously, picking their way past hastily abandoned guard posts and toppled equipment. The only sound was the ominous hum of machinery and the click of Mizar's boot heels on metal decking. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the corner of John's eye made him whirl around, cannon whining as it spun up. A holographic figure materialized, its sickly green light coalescing into the gaunt, sneering visage of Dr. Zorax. John cursed and depressed the firing stud, a hail of searing plasma pulses ripping through the hologram and dissipating it into a crackle of static. "Congratulations, Captain," Zorax's mocking voice boomed from hidden speakers, echoing off the chamber walls. "You found my little hidey hole." A deep, resonant boom shook the facility as a pair of massive blast doors crashed shut behind John and Mizar, sealing off their exit. "Did you really think I'd let you waltz in and steal my greatest creation?" Zorax continued, voice dripping with condescension. "Fools! I knew you were coming. My nano-weapon is already safe and secure, ready to deploy." "Shit," Mizar breathed, staring at her scanner in horror. "John, I'm picking up a cloaked ship in low orbit. That has to be where Zorax stashed the nano-torpedo." "Oh, it's far more than stashed, my dear," Zorax purred. "As we speak, my ship is preparing to quantum jump. Once it does, Well, a few billion screaming deaths will really liven up this dreary little corner of space, wouldn't you say? Mizar paled, her fingers flying over the scanner controls as she frantically tried to isolate the cloaked ship's location. John fired uselessly at the blast doors, the heavy cannon bolts sparking and skittering off the reinforced metal. "I'd say it's been a pleasure, but it hasn't," Zorax sneered. "Goodbye, Captain Cook. Do give my regards to Oblivion." With a final mad cackle, the transmission cut off. John snarled and redoubled his efforts to burn through the blast doors, the acrid stench of molten metal filling the air. Mizar worked feverishly at her scanner, desperate to pinpoint Zorax's ship before it could jump. "Damn it, John, it's no use," Mizar cried. "Those doors are too heavily armored. We're trapped in here." Come on, John growled through gritted teeth, glaring at the glowing slag-rimmed hole his cannon had gouged. It wasn't even halfway through. Just as Mizar isolated the quantum signature of Zorax's ship, a calm robotic voice boomed through the facility. "Warning. Self-destruct sequence activated. This facility will detonate in T-1 minute." The massive blast doors shuddered and began to grind open with agonizing slowness, the edges still glowing with heat from John's assault. Mizar grabbed his arm. "We have to go now. Once that ship quantum jumps—" John didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted for the widening gap in the doors, the computer's inflectionless voice implacably counting down their doom. Auto-turrets emerged from hatches in the walls and opened up on the fleeing pair, stitching the deck with laser fire. Shrapnel pinged off John's armor as he shielded Mizar, half dragging her along. They barely cleared the blast doors before the entire section collapsed behind them in a thunderous avalanche of debris. Lungs burning, they leapt aboard their waiting ship. John's fingers danced across the controls, and the Raptor's claw lifted off with a howl of straining thrusters. The shockwave from the facility's detonation slammed into the ship like a hammer blow, nearly knocking it into a spin. John wrestled with the bucking controls, teeth bared in a rictus snarl. Gouts of fire and shrapnel geysered from the dying base, pummeling the Raptor's shields. With a burst of acceleration that crushed them back into their seats, the Raptor's claw clawed for open space. John angled their vector to pursue Zorax's ship. Mizar hunched over her console, the eerie green light of the scanner playing over her taut features. "Zorax's ship dead ahead, 5,000 clicks and closing." "Divert all power to engines," John barked. The Raptor leapt forward as John coaxed every scrap of speed from the straining drive. The gap narrowed to a bare few hundred kilometers. Zorax's ship loomed large in their viewport, a jagged black silhouette against the stars. "He's spooling up to jump," Mizar shouted. "We've got maybe 20 seconds. John bared his teeth in a feral grin. "I only need 10. The Raptor's claw shuddered as John overrode the safeties and redlined the throttle. Mizar clutched her harness, eyes wide. At the last possible second, John wrenched the controls, slamming the Raptor into the side of Zorax's ship with a screech of tortured metal. The impact crushed the Raptor's bow, but the reinforced Durasteel prow punched into the enemy ship's hull like a battering ram. Seizing the moment of contact, John engaged the docking tube. The flexible boarding chute drilled through the rent in Zorax's hull and pressurized with a hiss. John and Mizar charged through, weapons ready. The chute disgorged them into a cavernous hangar. Looming before them was an enormous torpedo, its casing etched with dire biohazard warnings. Hunched over an access panel on the torpedo's flank was Zorax himself, frantically jabbing at controls. "Freeze, asshole," John roared. Zorax whirled, a plasma grenade already in hand. The deranged scientist hurled the grenade and dove behind a crate of munitions. John and Mizar scattered as the grenade detonated, superheated plasma splattering the deck. John rolled to his feet and opened fire, blaster cannons stitching the crates with holes. Zorax popped up, returning fire with a plasma carbine. A storm of bolts hammered sparks from John's armor as he dashed to new cover behind a bulky gravitic stabilizer. Mizar joined him, snapping off shots that sent Zorax scrambling. The hangar devolved into a blistering close-quarters firefight, combatants weaving between equipment as they traded shots. A stray plasma bolt struck an overhead coolant line, and the pipe burst, venting a geyser of searing fluid. Mizar screamed as the scalding liquid doused her leg, collapsing in agony. Zorax leapt atop a crate, carbine leveled at Mizar's prone form. But John lunged from cover, throwing himself in front of her. The plasma bolts slammed into his armor, the ceramic plates shattering. John roared in pain, but held his ground, unleashing a withering salvo that forced Zorax to duck. Grievously wounded, John sank to one knee, blaster cannon clattering to the deck. Zorax saw his chance. Howling in triumph, the madman broke cover and sprinted for the nanotorpedo, intent on finishing the arming sequence. Mizar gritted her teeth against the searing pain and snatched up the fallen blaster cannon. Bracing it against her hip, she sent a sustained burst of fire raking across Zorax's back. The scientist stumbled, momentum carrying him headfirst into the torpedo's unyielding hull. He crumpled to the deck and lay still, a smoking ruin. Mizar dragged herself over to John, heedless of her own wounds. He was a mess, armor blackened and blood seeping from a dozen rents. She fumbled at her belt, snapping for a microbot medical pod. It whirred over and extended a nozzle, bathing John in a shimmering suspension field. He relaxed as the soothing energy permeated his body, knitting bones and sealing gashes. Mizar slumped against the pod, raw agony shooting up her ruined leg, as she raised her comlink to hail the council. Mizar to command, Zorax is neutralized. The nanoweapon is secured. We need immediate extraction. The shipmind's mellifluous voice cut across her desperate plea. Quantum drive at full charge, translating to null space in 5, 4. No, Mizar cried, dragging herself to the control console. Override, abort quantum jump. TAS 1. Mizar slammed a fist into the unresponsive controls. The ship gave a shuddering lurch, internal gravity flickering, and then the stomach-wrenching sensation of a quantum transition flooded through her. The viewports flared with eldritch light. Drained and beaten, Mizar collapsed against John's medical pod, feeling the slight give of the energy field against her cheek. The ship was hurtling to an unknown destination, but they were alive, and they had stopped Zorax. For now, that would have to be enough. Mizar closed her eyes and let oblivion claim her. With a gut-wrenching lurch, Zorax's ship hurtled out of the quantum jump into a star system uncharted by any known galactic maps. Mizar dragged herself to the control console, fingers flying over the sensors. The readouts painted an impossible picture. John, this system is utterly devoid of any signs of spacefaring civilization. No orbital infrastructure, no sublight traffic, not even any comm chatter. But those satellites... She jabbed a finger at the tactical display, where a web of crimson threat markers had sprung to life around the system's sole life-bearing world. A ring of satellites, their design ancient but unmistakably advanced, had bristled to full alert at their arrival. The ship's automated alarms blared to life as the satellites opened fire. Beams of scintillating energy slashed through the void, punching through the ship's weakened shields like they were gossamer. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the deck bucked violently. Shit! Mizar wrenched the controls, throwing the ship into a dizzying, evasive pattern. But the satellite's fire was relentless, impossibly accurate. Screeching, tortured metal, and the acrid stench of fried electronics filled the air. They had only moments before the ship was torn to shreds. John hauled himself up, one arm still bound in the medical pod's healing field. He staggered to the comm station, an idea crystallizing through the haze of pain and exhaustion. His fingers danced over the controls, and with a crackle of power, he shunted every erg of energy into the transmitter. Broadcasting our quantum signature on all bands, he roared over the cacophony of destruction. If they're human, they'll recognize it. The ship shuddered under another volley of satellite fire, the hull integrity alarm shrieking. Mizar gritted her teeth, hands locked on the controls in a death grip. If they don't, we're dead! A tense heartbeat passed. 2. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the barrage ceased. The ship rang with an eerie silence, broken only by the fitful sparking of ruined systems. John and Mizar traded a disbelieving look. The comm crackled to life, an incoming transmission on an archaic frequency. A voice rang out, the words barely recognizable, a far-flung dialect of an ancient Terran tongue. John answered haltingly, dredging up long, unused syllables from the depths of his memory. The response was immediate and unmistakable. Stand down. A flight of atmospheric craft, sleek and predatory, rose from the planet to escort the limping ship down. As they broke through the cloud layer, John and Mizar beheld a world in twilight. Crumbling towers stabbed up from overgrown swathes of forest and grass, the bones of cities long abandoned. Nature had begun to reclaim the land, softening the hard edges of human civilization with creeping vines and carpets of moss. Their escort set down in a large plaza ringed by grand vine-choked buildings. A delegation awaited them, robed figures clustered before the yawning entrance of what might once have been a governmental palace. They approached as John and Mizar emerged from their battered ship, footfalls echoing in the cavernous silence. The leader, an elderly man with a lined face and piercing eyes, stepped forward and spoke in that same archaic tongue. "Welcome, lost son of Terra. Welcome to the Conclave, the last refuge of humanity amongst the stars." He gestured to the crumbling cityscape, a wistful sorrow in his eyes. "We are the descendants of the final colony ship, sent forth from old Earth before the homeworld was lost and our people scattered. You activated technology known only to humans of old. That is why we held our fire." His gaze fell on Mizar and his eyes narrowed. "But this one, she is not human. Why do you bring one of them here?" John stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Mizar and the Conclave elders. "This is Mizar. She fought by my side against the madman who threatened your world, threatened all worlds. Without her, I wouldn't have made it." He recounted their battle against Zorax, the words spilling out in a torrent. The elders listened, expressions grave. When John finished, the leader shared a long, meaningful look with his fellows. "We must see this Zorax and the weapon you spoke of." John nodded. Together, he and Mizar unsealed their ship's hold, dragging out Zorax's stasis-frozen corpse and the cold, silent bulk of the disarmed torpedo. The elders clustered around the body, muttering to each other in low tones. At a gesture from the leader, a pair of guards hauled the corpse away. The leader turned his attention to the torpedo, running a hand over its pitted casing. "This is not Hazari work," he murmured. "This is human technology. Ancient but unmistakable." He straightened, fixing John with a piercing stare. "What you carry is a peacemaker, an autonomous weapon from the days of the final wars on old Earth. It seeks out and destroys any sapient species engaged in large-scale conflict. Entire worlds fell to the peacemakers before they were banned." A grim frown settled over his weathered face. "We thought them all destroyed, lost to time. But it seems some survived, sleeping, waiting for the scent of war. You have done the galaxy a great service in stopping this one's reawakening." The leader extended a hand to John, clasping his arm in a warrior's grip. "The Conclave is in your debt. We will provide all you need to repair your ship and heal your wounds. Stay with us a while. There is much to discuss." In the days that followed, as John mended under the ministrations of the Conclave's doctors, he found his thoughts turning inward. The rootless, mercenary life he'd led, the unexamined anger that had driven him, in the cool tranquility of the Conclave's ancient halls, it all seemed so hollow. The Conclave spoke of a dream, a mission to one day rebuild human civilization from the scattered embers of the past. The more he listened, the more John felt a spark kindling in his soul, a long-buried sense of purpose. Mizar felt the change in him, and deep within she felt an answering pull. The days among the humans had opened her eyes to depths of their culture and history she'd never imagined. Her thoughts drifted guiltily to the Council, to her own people. How could she face them after all she had seen and learned? One violet-tinged evening, as they walked among the crumbling towers and lush foliage, John turned to her. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if humans and aliens could move beyond our bloody past, find a way to coexist, to build something new, together? Mizar was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, thoughtful. After seeing the worst of both our kinds, I am starting to imagine the best of both. John reached out, entwining his fingers with hers. His voice was low, almost a whisper. So am I. John's fingers entwined with Mizar's as they walked under the star-strewn sky. Her hand tightened around his. In that perfect, crystallized moment, the universe seemed to still. Then Mizar's wristcom chimed urgently, shattering the silence. "Priority transmission from the Council," the device chirped. Mizar's eyes widened as a flickering holodisplay materialized, the grim visage of a Hazari admiral filling the air. "Agent Mizar, a Hazari battle fleet has entered the system and is holding position beyond the orbital perimeter. You are ordered to secure the Peacemaker and prepare it for immediate transfer to our custody." Mizar gaped at the display, a chill racing down her spine. "That's impossible. How did they find us?" The Admiral's lips twisted. "We received a quantum-encrypted distress beacon from this system. It contained Dr. Zorax's clearance codes. Now carry out your orders or the fleet will commence planetary bombardment." The transmission winked out. Mizar turned to John, eyes wide with horror. "Zorax! He must have sent a message before he—" Her voice choked off. John's face turned hard as stone. "We have to get that weapon off-world. Give the Hazari what they want." "No!" The voice of the Conclave Elder cracked like a whip. He strode forward, attendants trailing behind. "The Peacemaker is far too dangerous to entrust to anyone, let alone the Hazari." Mizar stepped towards the Elder, hands raised pleadingly. "Please, you have to reconsider. The Hazari will destroy this entire planet." The Elder shook his head, immovable. "We cannot unleash such devastation on the galaxy, not again. The Peacemaker must remain here." Mizar looked frantically from the Elder to John, torn between duty and her heart. John reached out to her, but she flinched back. With a choked sob, her hand flashed to her belt. John had a split second to register the crackle of a neural disruptor before everything went black. He came to on a cold stone floor, head pounding. Ignoring the pain, he leapt to his feet. The Conclave Elder stood over him, face etched with sorrow. "Mizar has taken the Peacemaker. She's fleeing the planet in your ship." A cold, terrible rage settled over John. He pushed past the Elder, sprinting for the landing pad. A single Conclave fighter squatted there, arrow sleek. John vaulted into the cockpit, hands flying over the controls. The canopy snapped shut, and the engines roared to life. Seconds later, he punched through the atmosphere, the fighter screaming towards the distant glint of his own ship. Sensors showed it on an intercept course with the Hazari flagship. John slammed a fist on the comm panel. "Mizar, don't do this!" Her image crackled to life, eyes brimming with tears. "I have no choice, John. I can't let them slaughter the Conclave. And I can't let you hand over a weapon that will kill billions. It's the only way to save them, to save you." John's voice dropped to a ragged whisper. "Not like this, Mizar. Please, don't make me stop you." For a long moment she held his gaze. Then, with a shuddering breath, she reached out and terminated the link. As John's ship closed with the Hazari flagship, a shimmering beam of light connected the two. The Peacemaker had been transferred. John bared his teeth in a silent snarl and punched his thrusters to full. The fighter hurtled towards the flagship's flank, weapons powered up and screaming. Mizar's horrified face filled his comm screen, begging him to stop. He blocked the transmission. A heartbeat before impact, he fired every torpedo in his arsenal. They struck the flagship's hull and detonated, the shaped plasma charges ripping through armor and power systems. Secondary explosions marched across the massive ship's flank as John's fighter slammed into the gaping wound. Console sparks and emergency klaxons howled. In the CIC of the flagship, the Hazari admiral snarled at the damage report scrolling across his screen. "Weapons are offline, main drive unresponsive." The admiral slammed a fist down. then jabbed a finger at the comm officer. "Signal the fleet to open fire. Burn that human ship from the sky." In her cockpit, Mizar screamed as a storm of energy beams and missiles converged on John's stricken fighter. It vanished in a blinding flash, a miniature sun blooming against the starscape. "John?" Mizar howled his name, raw animal grief ripping from her throat. The Admiral's face appeared on her screen, twisting with cruel satisfaction. "All ships, set targeting coordinates on the planet. Prepare to fire the Peacemaker." "No," Mizar shrieked. "You swore you'd spare them." The Admiral sneered at her. "Stupid girl. This world will serve as an example to all who defy the Hazari." In the heart of the crippled flagship, the Peacemaker torpedo shuddered in its launch tube. Mizar watched in mute horror as it accelerated away, arcing towards the defenseless planet. But as it hurtled through the void, the Peacemaker's ancient systems sprang to life. It reached out, seeking the flagship's targeting data to pinpoint concentrations of sentient aggression. It found only silence. The flagship drifted, its computer banks and telemetry shattered by John's suicide run. Unable to determine if its target contained active combatants, the Peacemaker defaulted to core programming. A world seemingly abandoned by civilization, now harboring the fragile spark of human survivors. This was the seeding directive. Parameters had been met. As it pierced the upper atmosphere, the Peacemaker's casing split open. A brilliant web of energy unfurled, spreading across the sky. Mizar shielded her eyes against the glare, a hitching sob escaping her lips. She had failed. She had doomed John's people, doomed herself. But the light did not sear flesh from bone. It did not boil the seas and rend the earth. It shimmered and danced, raining down in a gentle cascade. Where it touched, it sank into soil and sea, air and stone, suffusing the world with a soft luminescence. The voice of the Peacemaker rang out, impossibly vast, speaking to Mizar's soul as much as her ears. "Threat detected. Peacemaker protocols active. Seeding program initiated. Prepare for the new dawn." With a final pulse, the Peacemaker expended the last of its ancient energies and crumbled to dust. On the planet below, Mizar fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. John's sacrifice had saved his people, had saved her from the most terrible mistake of her life. In the skies above, the Hazari ships hung impotently, their weapons silent as if in mocking tribute to the man who had defied an empire. Mizar rose and opened a channel to the conclave. "This is Agent Mizar, formerly of the Galactic Council. The Hazari have betrayed us all. I hereby renounce my allegiance and dedicate my life to opposing their tyranny as—" her voice broke, "as John Cook did. Let the galaxy hear this and know the truth." She cut the transmission, then crushed the comm beneath her heel. Drawing a shuddering breath, Mizar turned back towards the conclave compound, towards an uncertain future. But a future she would face as John had taught her, with courage, with integrity, and with an unshakable commitment to forge a better path between the stars. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.